why doesn't everybody introduce themselves? I'll introduce myself at the end and then ask some questions here between us. I guess I'm between us and lunch, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Make it sharp and to the point. Okay. Prepare your questions ahead of time, please. I'm going to ask you a few. Go ahead, Karen.
I'm Karen Gregory. I run a law firm called Furman Gregory, and we work with entrepreneurs. I've been doing technology commercialization work in various capacities, including having been a venture capitalist for about 30 years. So excited to be here. It's my first trip to Oakland.
Hi, my name is Gordon Brooks. I'm a recovering entrepreneur. It's been 22 days since I run my last company. So I've been in the technology business a long time. Actually started in what was called time sharing for the first 8 or 9 years of my career. It was really kind of cloud computing and SaaS, so this doesn't seem that revolutionary to me. But I've spent a lot of time starting and running businesses. I've either started or helped to start 4 businesses. 2 of those have IPO'd successfully. A third will probably IPO at the end of this year. So it's kind of in my blood, and it's what I like to do. And coming to see what the next big ideas are the things that I think get people who run businesses excited.
Bill Seibel. I started my career spending a lot of time at a big company, Air Products and Chemicals, as a Fortune 150 Fortune 150 manufacturing company, ran IT there, ran supply chain there. And I just want to get closer to technology, so I left and focused on startups in Boston. And since then, I've been on the executive team of 7 startups. I've been either the CEO or chairman of 4 of them. Of the 7, 2 have gone public, 4 have been sold, 1's still out there. And I've been on about 25 or so boards. And I think the thing that I'm the most proud of is that I've had around 100 people who have worked for me in my organizations who have gone on to be CEOs or COOs of other companies. Since I sold my last company 3 years ago, I've started a small consulting firm that's directed at helping CEOs of technology companies scale their businesses more effectively.
Tim?
Hi. First of all, let me apologize for. Do we need the mic, by the way? Can you hear okay?
I don't even think they're on.
Okay.
There you go.
If you don't push the button up, they won't be.
We'll yell.
My car service decided to take a big, long circle around Boston to get here. I guess they didn't quite know where this was. Apologies. My name is Tim Rowe. Thank you for having me. As you may have seen from the bio, I run Cambridge Innovation Center, which is a facility in Cambridge next to MIT that houses a significant number of startups. I think Ben asked me to come to share some perspectives on, I guess we've had about 550 startups get started in my center in the last 10 years. And the questions were, kind of what patterns do we see coming out of that? And I look forward to addressing those questions.
So as Thornton said, I'm Ben Levitin. I guess I represent the investment side of things. I work as a strategic investor for a not-for-profit that invests on behalf of the U.S. government and U.S. intelligence services, based here in Boston. And I think I've worked with most of the people on this panel in various capacities, and there's some big numbers here and some impressive folks. So I do want to make sure there's a chance for you all to ask questions and kind of get the view of the people who consume the interesting ideas outside a corporate setting and decide to commit their money and their time and their networks, which are quite extensive, to starting new businesses and scaling them up. So since the topic of today, I've been sitting over there listening to people and also watching the reaction to the healthcare legislation. Let me start with something a little bit more topical, which is the healthcare reform that just got passed, and get some quick reactions on what opportunities do the panelists think this opens up for startups, and what opportunities do they think it closed down? Why don't I start with Karen, because I know you've got a lot of background in tech, biotech and medical.
I do. I'm a little concerned, I will say, both because there's already an increasing pressure on the regulatory side that's come in with the Obama administration, with the new FDA commissioner. She's got a real enforcement mandate in her view, and so I'm worried about that already. And then I think I'm worried because now reimbursement may be a harder hurdle because insurance companies are going to have to pay more. They're going to have to pay much more attention now to evidence-based medicine. So I worry that startups are going to either drop out, they're not going to be able to raise the kind of venture capital that they need to succeed. So
Yeah,
I'm quite
Phil, I know
concerned.
you're on the board of some healthcare companies.
Yeah, I agree with you, except if you're a startup focused on selling into that market, which has the opposite effect because of all the reasons that you just mentioned. A huge amount of regulation, huge amount of change in the market. I remember I was at a seminar once where Michael Porter was talking about healthcare and talking about all the changes that need to be made, and an executive from an insurance agency raised his hand and said, so I hear about all these dramatic changes. Can you name one other industry that has gone through what you're suggesting we go through? And he paused, and I thought they had him stumped, and he said, I can't think of one that hasn't. So I think anytime you run through that kind of change in a market, it makes it harder for the companies who aren't focused on that to be successful, but it creates a whole set of opportunities for companies that are focused on that to bring in new models to deal with that change.
So Tim, you see a lot of healthcare startups in,
Yeah,
in
in
your
fact,
labs.
so one thing I didn't say about myself is I spend a day a week with a venture capital fund, and we did invest actually in a company very recently that is jumping into this market. The concern I have with the healthcare legislation is not with the legislation itself, but with the fact that we haven't come up with enough solutions to reduce the cost, not the price of healthcare, but the cost of delivering healthcare. So I think the challenge to innovation land is going to be, let's come up with more ways, better ways to actually hit the cost. We invest in a company called Q Alliance, which has 3 clinics in Washington State that's doing unlimited primary care for $60 a month right now with no prior conditions, restrictions. I could go into it in more detail afterwards if you're interested, but
So subscription based, but it's not in the cloud, so it only gets one buzzword point.
Exactly. Actually, they are. One of the things they did, and they changed the model, is that they do allow both email and voice and other kinds of healthcare support. The current insurance model doesn't pay doctors to help you remotely, yet helping you remotely may be the cheapest way to provide you care. So you've got to change the system a little bit in order to enable these other kinds of care delivery.
Yeah,
So I
interesting.
get like half a point.
Okay, you get a half a point. Social media. So the last panel talked a bunch about, last few panels talked a lot about corporate innovation. I'm just curious, from the serial entrepreneurs here, do you feel like you learned a lot in the corporate settings you were in to become a better CEO and startup entrepreneur or serial entrepreneur? Or do you feel like you would have been better served to just jump right into becoming a serial entrepreneur with a C?
Yeah, no, I think the first 15, 17 years of my career was in education. I don't think you have to go to school that long, but I'm a slow learner. I worked for companies like Computer Sciences Corporation and ADP and some pretty interesting, well-run companies. And I think you learn a lot and you get a good perspective. It doesn't mean you can't come out of the box and be a good entrepreneur, but I think there's a big difference between being somebody who innovates a technology or an idea or somebody who builds a sustainable company. And I think those are a little bit different skill set than some rare people have them both. But I found it very useful getting my background from some big companies.
Bill?
Well, I think you learn a lot about what works, and you learn a lot about what doesn't work. And the what works stuff is around how to manage something, how to harness resources to get it done, how to figure out whether there are models behind it that supports it. But then the part that you learn about what doesn't work is sometimes the length of time it takes to get things done in a corporate environment. So the lessons that I've learned probably come equally in both of those categories. The set of stuff I never want to repeat again. The set of stuff I'm glad I had.
How difficult change is.
Yeah.
So Tim, you see a lot of guys that come to you that have, I don't know, 500, you said, 550? And you have both corporate people innovating in your labs, and you have startup, serial, true startup with the C entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
What are some of the things you're trying to compare and you would say you compare and contrast it to?
Well, I think that one of the things that a hallmark of the serial entrepreneur with a C, as it were, is you are incredibly scrappy. You have no money, you have very limited resources, so there is a phenomenon which I've observed, and you guys may have seen this as well, that if IBM seeks to solve a given problem, and if a couple of young folks out of Olin try to solve that problem, the way in which they solve it will probably have a couple orders of magnitude different amounts of money involved. And from an efficiency standpoint, what happens sometimes is that the young, couple of young entrepreneurs can really find a cost-effective solution to a problem that is almost impossible for a corporate innovation group to achieve.
Okay.
I'm not sure that it's truly impossible for the corporate groups. Some of it is a mindset, right? If I give you an example, I'm working on launching a cafe for entrepreneurs right now in Cambridge, and we have something like 200 people signed up to help us, an active group of about 60, a full-time manager, mostly full-time manager, and nobody's getting paid, right? And why are they doing it? It's a little unclear. It's sort of interesting to everybody. They're finding time, but there's no salaries. We actually haven't created an entity yet, and we've been working on this for about a year. If you were a larger organization trying to create, if you're a Starbucks and you're trying to create a new
McDonald's is here, I think.
yeah.
Isn't someone here from McDonald's?
and then you would, you'd be probably paying, dozens of people to do this, and you might have spent a couple $1 million to get to where we are now, spending all of $0.
Mhm.
So there's power in being scrappy. As a corporate entrepreneur, you need to make sure that the investments you're putting in are properly. You're going to get the kind of return that you're looking for, and think about ways to think like a scrappy entrepreneur along the way.
Heard a lot about IP protection, a lot of eye towards innovating, and as soon as you innovate, you're gonna patent it. I'm just curious, since we have a lawyer on the panel, you're seeing more patent applications from younger companies in certain areas? When you pitch a young guy, does he say, "Look, it's not worth the money. I'll come back around and patent it," or are people really getting more aggressive these days?
Well, I mean, a lot of my startups come out of the university, so the university has already decided that they're going to patent something. But I think that there is a trend, especially in software, not to go the patent route because it is expensive and it doesn't take a lot for someone to work around your patent, and then the enforcement is huge. I mean, you're spending all your time running around to see who's infringing. So I think a lot of folks are looking at trade secrets. They're looking at actually alternatives to patenting at this point. But I don't know if the venture community is going to be able to wrap their mind around that being as attractive for investment, because that's usually the first question is what's proprietary and how have you protected it, so it's a barrier to entry.
So let me ask,
I think the value in my companies to patents is to convince another company that we have IP that they want to buy. It's different. But it has nothing to do with enforcement, because a small company just, if a small company tried to sue Google for patent infringement, Google would find 500 patents that we're probably infringing on as well. So it's much less around enforcement, but it's around sort of the buzz that you need to put around a company to prove to an investor or a buyer that what you have is different than what other people have.
When does, well, I know IP is very, very good, but when should an entrepreneur, somebody who wants to do something when should they talk to a lawyer? It's not just patents. It's because frequently, these sheep show up in basically the killing pen, which is the VC, right? And there's some asymmetric skill set, and like they walk out with like a smile and they're going to go with the idea, right? And it's not until you do 3 or 4 of these when you actually get the full value of your ideas. I mean, so when should an entrepreneur have a legal advice as they're moving forward?
Day one.
Because it's not just all about the idea; it's about the money the idea makes.
Yeah, early.
Yeah.
Early,
Absolutely.
yeah.
This is
But
the place that
there are lawyers out there that specialize in working with startups and can actually kind of school and that type of thing. And then there's old guys like us who people can call on once in a while to get some help. But I think being an entrepreneur for myself, I don't want to speak for Bill, is sometimes just adult supervision, as you would say, for really bright people. You just get really bright, young, out-of-the-box thinkers and let them go, and then anticipate the problems and work with the lawyers and let them go do what they have to do.
I would say, with my VC hat on, if you come in very lawyered up, that's a turnoff. You want to sign the NDA before we show you our plan and all that. It's like, On the other hand, if you haven't thought about the legal issues, that's also a turnoff. You need to sort of come in right there in the middle. And you're typically, Boston area lawyers will provide their time free of charge to just chat with a young entrepreneur, give them a little bit of background, hear what they're doing, and kind of give them some pointers about what might be most important. So there's no reason not to do that. You should absolutely do that. Find someone you're comfortable with and have that initial conversation.
And they should know a lot about the industry. They should know a lot about
Find,
startups.
find
and-
somebody, ideally, that knows your segment, whatever it is. If it's clean tech, find somebody who's done clean tech work.
Yeah, I was struck by the bit about how focused the corporates in the room are in quickly linking the innovation to the patent, and how hungry, I guess, the corporate law office is to file patent applications, because I think that hits some kind of a scorecard about innovation. And I certainly know IBM makes a big claim about the number of patents they file every year, not really knowing what they're going to collect from them. But in the world of startups, to Tim's point, again, I'm not speaking for Gordon or Bill, you come too lawyered up, you come too aggressively at an investor, certainly come at me with an NDA, that goes right to the round file, because I'm not interested in being barred from thinking creatively with that startup, or being constrained in who I can discuss the idea with. So that's just a difference I noticed between the corporate and the pure startup world. So shifting gears for just a second, we talk a
Can I
little bit.
make one more
Please,
point on
yeah.
that? So I think the majority of startups, and certainly many startups, don't end up pursuing the thing that they start out pursuing.
Exactly.
So if you look at Microsoft, they started out doing Apple language for Apple computers, AppleSoft, and then they eventually did OSs. And if you look across startups, this pattern is very common. And so if you spend a lot of time up front on the IP of your original idea, you might be wasting your time. What you're probably doing is you're going to shift several times through the course of the development of your business and figure out what's really important. And while you're doing those shifts, you want to be fairly unencumbered. So probably the way a VC looks at this is more, what is your execution capability? What's your ability to quickly move, adapt your ideas, and execute on your ideas? Then it is, have you really buttoned down your technology? With the caveat that if it's a new heavy-duty science, it's an alloy, that you've invented, or a drug you've invented, of course, you want to have that solidly IP protected. But if what you're doing is one of these kind of business model type businesses, which many of us are pursuing these days, you probably, the patent part is probably not so important early on.
So let me turn my attention to a little bit more of the meat and potatoes of innovation and entrepreneurship, which is making and selling things. In what has been told to all of us as being a very difficult economic environment. I'm particularly curious, Gordon, you worked around the world. What changed in the last 12 or 18 months in the software industry, this recession? I know, Bill, you've got a lot of experience there. I'm just curious, let's talk a little bit about innovation in the context of a recession.
I actually think recession is a great time for innovation. I mean, when some of us here were involved early days starting Cambridge Technology Partners, we started that in 1991, but you have to go to the heart of the issue. You got to solve problems that other people, more traditional players, were not able to solve. I think it's a great opportunity. It's a tough time to raise money. People don't want to give you money unless you have a product, unless you have clients. So it's harder to raise money unless you don't really need the money. In this type of environment, anytime there's crashes involved, whether it be .com or we're just going through, it makes everybody kind of really skittish and really kind of go back to some of the basics.
So this is the second crash you've been through. You went through the .com crash with Breakaway,
Right.
and now you've been through the financial crisis crash. What's different? Same thing?
I think this is more fundamental to the country. I think the .com thing was, I think everybody got crazy and kind of lost fun for some of the fundamentals of investing. I think what's going on now, I think, is much more long term. But again, it's cycles. Everything goes through cycles, and you do it long enough, and you see time sharing back in the late 70s and early 80s, and you start getting into cloud computing and software as a service. I mean, those are all multi-tenant, pay-as-you-go, sold on optimization and being able to turn it on and turn it off and scale and a lot of the same types of things. So I think it's just part of what's going on, and I think in the middle of a recession, I think there are opportunities. In the middle of healthcare reform, I think there's opportunities. With everything that's bad, I think when things are going just gangbusters, great. You might be better getting something funded, but I think it's harder to come up with those breakaway ideas.
Bill, you're probably on more boards than anyone here.
So-
What are you seeing across your portfolio?
So about 15% of the time, we are in a major recession. But if you look at the numbers, something like 25% of the Fortune 1000 companies were started in a major recession, and 50% of the Fortune 50 companies. And it's never been clear to me why, but I think my hypothesis is that if you start a company in that period of time, you develop better survival skills, better ability to adapt than if you started in a boom time and then have to face survival further on down your growth. But I think the thing that's different about this recession is summed up in a presentation that Sequoia Partners had to all their CEOs a year and a half ago. I don't know if you've seen this or not, but let's pull that because there's a couple of quotes. Sequoia's pretty good. They funded Apple and Google and Cisco and YouTube and a number of the other major success stories. And they called all their CEOs together October of 2008, right at the start of the recession. And the quotes, well, the first thing they saw when they came in was a tombstone with RIP, good times on it. So that sort of set the tone. And the quotes were things like the partners saying, "We are in drastic times. That means drastic measures must be taken to survive. Forget about getting ahead. Forget about innovating. We're talking survival. Get this point into your head. There'll be consequences for those in this room that hesitate. Act now, slash expenses, cut deep, and keep marching." Then they go on to say the death spiral sucks you in. You're in it before you know it, and then you die. You should have at least 1 year's worth of cash on hand. Spend it like it's your last dollar. And then my favorite quote, "The valley has gotten fat with salespeople. Cut their base salaries. And since you already have a product, cut most of the engineers that you have." So that doesn't leave a lot of room for innovation. And the interesting thing is that the reason that was circulated so widely isn't because all the people in the industry looked at that and said, these guys are whack jobs. They circulated it because that was the message that they were adhering to as well. They thought that was the appropriate message. And so the impact that has on CEOs of new companies, it's harder to get money. It's harder to get money if you're not based within a day trip of the investor. It's impossible to get money if you're selling to a CIO because the CIOs, in their mind, will only buy from the larger companies with larger sales forces. And if you're an existing company, learn about triage, which means that if you're not succeeding, you're going to get shut down. If you're on the bubble, you're going to get more time and more attention than you want without the money to fix things. And if you are successful and are growing, then you're going to continue to hear the message that I just read about as a way of sort of setting the tone on what you think about innovation and getting ahead going forward.
Can I add to that?
Please.
I would say Sequoia's advice was probably just right for incumbents as you enter a recession. And we had, I think, 180 companies at CIC on October 1, 2008, and we saw 30 of them go away almost immediately. And a bunch of them probably read the Sequoia presentation, and they or their investors just shut down. But we saw 9 months later that we were up to something like 220 companies, and we're 250 today. And so what happened, there was a bit of a yo-yo, and what happens if you're not an incumbent, if you're an entrant in a recession is interesting. Because the entrant gets to look at a different set of economic priorities of buyers than existed before. There are essentially no companies in the market on day 2 of a recession whose business model is addressing the needs that exist in a recession. Right? Yeah. So there's suddenly the window opens. Almost every product is either a growth-favored product or a cost-favored product. If you will, there's a switch in the economy. So when things are going great, there's a lot of money. You're trying to say, what are the new cool things we can do? And maybe you're selling a lot of, high-end products to people who don't really need them, right? And in a recession, and by the way, in those boom times, the companies that are doing things like manage your phone bill costs down a little bit are not usually doing as well. People aren't paying attention to them because, what if I save 10% of my phone bill? It's just a waste of time. I want to focus on growth. And when that switch flips, there are a whole bunch of opportunities that open up to help people do the things that now are important to them. And so 2 things that are great for entrepreneurs, and I'm building, I think, on what you said, is that in this recession, first of all those great people get laid off from other companies. So you've got a huge resource of really talented people that are now available for free or for cheap to help you with your startup. And second of all, you have really no competition in this sort of world of a new set of priorities in your market space. So maybe you were selling, somebody else is selling, expensive solar panels. You're coming up with cheap solar panels, and suddenly that market goes up. Second point I wanted to make is a little different. It's for the incumbents. The reason Sequoia made this point, I think, and the reason why it's important for folks if you're an incumbent in a recession is that it's often the last person standing that survives. And the example that the sort of oft-used example is Best Buy versus Circuit City. The day after Circuit City went bankrupt and shut their doors, what happened to Best Buy sales? Skyrocketed, probably doubled, right? So if you were Best Buy versus Circuit City, you could extend your runway as Best Buy one day past Circuit City's bankruptcy. You were out of the hot soup, right? So it does make sense as an incumbent to be really radical like this. As a new entrant in a recession, there's all kinds of opportunities.
All right, so let's work on the word radical here for just a second. I want to hear three radical, this is a lightning round, three radical predictions for new technologies that you think are going to go mainstream or move from the consumer world into the corporate world that people aren't aware of or aren't really thinking about right now. Tim, go.
Okay, Android will totally trounce in mobile. iPhone will become an also-ran.
Gordon.
I think what's going on with YouTube, I think there's a corporate asset in video that is just completely untapped, not to be able to track what video you have, but do keyword searches and find all that hidden information from video conferences and things like that. So
Okay, Bill?
I think that's going.
I think anything that is mainstream in a new technology, maybe not will, but should find its way into corporations. So micro communications like Twitter, virtualization, the whole super widgetization.
Super widgetization. Karen?
I think just more opportunities for corporations to keep their salespeople globalized.
Okay.
Some technologies.
Quick predictions. How many tech IPOs this year? 2010. Or 20 odd last year. Anyone care to predict? You guys take a couple companies public. Gordon?
Yeah, there's certainly
A number.
There's going to be
Not words, a number.
Lightning word.
110.
110. Big explosion. 3-4x growth.
I'm not allowed to say any words, so.
Yeah.
Give you a range,
Bill?
but-
There were 15 filings in Q1, so the numbers are going to be around 50 this year.
50.
So by double last year.
Yeah, I think that's
That was what I was going to say.
50-50. Okay. Name one place you go to get information that people may not know about. A blog, a researcher, a website, maybe somebody you follow on Twitter that's not well known that would help people with the field of innovation.
Well, Twitter search mining. If you're trying to figure out what's trending, start searching Twitter to see how much people are talking about it.
Bill?
Not one place I go. I mean, I don't think that I start at the same place and then just see where
Where do you
it takes
start?
me. I'll start by Googling the topic and then trying to find the blogs that are connected to that search and going to the blogs to find out where they point me.
Gotcha. Gordon?
I call Thornton.
It depends. I go what Bill does. I go to Google and I just figure out what I'm looking for.
Okay, I like Mahalo, so I go to Mahalo a lot. All right, questions from the group? Any questions? Okay, let me just, I'm sorry, sir, please.
So I was glad to hear that you talked about time sharing and its relationship to cloud computing, because we do seem to have this forgetting about the past and how some of today's new ideas, in fact, were yesterday's ideas also. What's the implication of that for venture capital and venture capital ideas?
There was a great Einstein quote about, hide your source, right? It's, unfortunately, I don't think people remember a lot of that. But I tell you, back in the time sharing days, security, all the same things we're talking about now had to be dealt with. And what we were doing clinical trials for all the pharmaceutical companies, and it's probably the most confidential data out there. So the implications from a venture perspective, I don't know. I think if people can look at cycles and history and what's happened, what's worked and what's not, and pull a little bit out of that, I think the entrepreneur probably has a better shot at having a discussion with the venture capitalist with a little more perspective on what's happened in the past than going in without that knowledge base.
Bill?
I'd say if you look at any cycle, there was probably a cycle before that that looked a lot like that didn't succeed. You look at what happened on the web years ago versus semantic web today. If you look at case tools from 20 years ago, the case tool company, to software visualization tools today, there's a whole set of patterns that continue to repeat, and I think the implication is it's not just about the technology, but it's finding the intersection of the technology at the right time to be able to create something that's compelling to a buyer.
Quick question for all of you guys. Does the presence or absence of a venture capitalist in a project that somebody wants you to get involved in, does that matter to you? Does the presence or absence of another investor matter to you, Tim? Does it matter to you, Karen? Quick yes, no.
Yes.
It depends.
Yeah, it matters.
Matters a lot.
Only matters to me because it's more likely I'll get paid.
Okay. Last question. You get pitched a lot of deals, all of you, things to get involved in, and you have responded to a lot of signals over time, maybe the way somebody is dressed, the way they present, whether they come lawyered up or not. What are some of the signals you watch when someone comes in to tell you a story about a new idea or a new project that they want you to get involved in, either as an investor, a board member, an entrepreneur, a leader?
Do they listen?
Do they know their competition?
Pragmatic optimist.
Pragmatic optimist.
Do they have a view of what the big game changer is, but at the same time, do they have a view on how they're going to get their first 2 or 3 customers?
Excellent. All right. With that, we're all wrapped up. It's 12:15, and I think it's time for lunch. I want to thank the panel.